What if I told you the most prolific serial killer in American history isn't dead? He's still alive, rotting behind bars in Washington state, and he remembers every single murder. This is the story of Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, who slaughtered dozens, maybe over 100 women, and smiled through every confession. To understand the full scope of this true crime story, let's go to where it all began. Before the headlines. Before the river. Before the bodies. There was a boy, one the world forgot until it was too late. Gary Leon Ridgway was born February 18, 1949, in Salt Lake City, Utah. His family later moved to a modest home in SeaTac, Washington. On the outside they looked ordinary. But inside things were far from normal. His mother, Mary Ridgway, was strict, cold, and controlling. She bathed Gary long past the age when it was appropriate. Naked, ashamed, he sat in the tub while she scrubbed him, said nothing kind, and left him feeling powerless. Whenever he wet the bed, which he did often into his teens, it was Mary who cleaned the mess, but never quietly. She scolded him, berated him, made him feel broken. His father, Thomas Ridgway, was a bus driver. He kept mostly to himself, but when he did speak, it was often to rant about prostitutes, calling them disgusting, worthless. Gary sat quietly and listened. Those words, those judgments, they stayed with him. School offered no escape. His IQ tested at just 82, barely above what experts consider intellectually challenged. He struggled to read, to keep up, to connect. He was quiet, distant, forgettable. His teachers passed him along. His classmates barely noticed he was there. After high school, Gary enlisted in the Navy. He saw the world, ports, bars, women. He visited sex workers overseas just like thousands of other men. But when he contracted gonorrhea, something snapped. He didn't blame himself. He blamed the women. In his mind, they had infected him, used him, wronged him. That resentment began to fester. When he returned home, Ridgway tried to appear normal. He got a job painting trucks at Kenworth. Got married. Mowed the lawn. Paid his taxes. But nothing inside him had healed. The shame from childhood. The humiliation in the bathroom. The hatred toward women who reminded him of both his mother and his infection. It all stayed buried, waiting. Until it found a way out. And when it did, the world would know his name. Do you believe childhood trauma can explain what Gary became? Or was he always capable of murder? Share your thoughts in the comments. Summer, 1982. The body of 16-year-old Wendy Caulfield surfaced in the murky current of Washington's Green River, strangled, discarded, and alone. At first, police thought it might have been a one-off. A runaway, a tragedy. But then came another. Deborah Bonner. And another. Marcia Chapman. Cynthia Hines. Opal Mills. Different names. Same ending. Dumped in the woods. Left in the water. Forgotten by most, but not by the killer. The press didn't know it yet, but Washington had just stepped into the shadows of its darkest nightmare. The man behind it was quiet, unassuming. He clocked in each morning at the Kenworth truck plant like everyone else. No one suspected the mild-mannered painter who brought lunch from home and rarely spoke out of turn. But when the workday ended, Gary Ridgway was hunting. His victims were mostly young sex workers or runaways, girls on the margins trying to survive. Ridgway picked them up in his pickup truck, promised a quick job, a warm ride, a safe space. Then he'd strangle them, sometimes with his bare hands, other times with a ligature. Rope, cord, shoelaces. Whatever was available. And he didn't always leave. Sometimes he came back, days later, to the cold, decomposing bodies, to do what no sane person could even speak aloud. He violated them after death. Again and again. And no one knew. Patterns began to emerge. Rings and necklaces were gone, always stripped. Bodies were posed unnaturally. Some were hidden together, arranged in small clusters across the dense, green forests of King County. He had his own graveyards. And no one could find him. Detective Dave Reichert, a young and determined King County deputy, was one of the first to connect the dots. He walked the riverbanks, followed leads, knocked on doors. He saw the pain in the victims' families, heard the silence in their stories. But Ridgway stayed one step ahead. The task force grew. One name stood out, Robert Keppel. A seasoned investigator, brilliant and methodical. He'd already dealt with monsters before. Now he was chasing another, and the pressure was suffocating. In a move that shocked many, the task force reached out to a convicted killer on death row, Ted Bundy. Bundy, already infamous for his own horrors, offered something only a predator could give: insight. He told investigators the killer would likely revisit the bodies, that he'd leave them exposed on purpose. And in a chilling moment, Bundy called him a biter. But even with Bundy's clues and growing pressure from the media, there was no arrest. No breakthrough. The Green River Killer had vanished into daylight. And the bodies kept coming. By 1984, the public was terrified. Parents locked their doors, women stopped walking alone, and the Green River became a place of whispers and warnings. But Gary Ridgway wasn't slowing down. He was just getting started. And no one suspected the quiet man working at the truck plant. The Green River Task Force was born out of desperation and fear. More than 50 detectives from King County, Seattle PD, and beyond were brought together to hunt one man, one ghost, the killer who stalked women and dumped them like trash in the woods. The public wanted answers. Politicians demanded action. And investigators were running in circles. Dave Reichert was now leading the charge. His face appeared in every press conference, his voice trying to reassure a terrified community. But behind closed doors, even he admitted it, they had no idea who the killer was. By 1983, Gary Ridgway had already been questioned twice. His name was in the files. His truck had been seen near victims. He even admitted to knowing a few of the women who'd disappeared. But when they put him on the polygraph, he passed. Not once but twice. No deception detected. They let him go. The truth? The technology wasn't there yet. DNA testing in the early 1980s was in its infancy, too crude, too slow, too unreliable to hold up in court. Evidence that could have nailed him sat useless in evidence bags. Meanwhile, Ridgway continued his routine. He showed up for work, clocked in, painted trucks, went home. On weekends he attended barbecues, mowed the lawn, smiled in family photos. His third wife, Judith Mawson, thought she'd found the love of her life. Gary was sweet, gentle. He brought her flowers. Read the Bible out loud. Never raised his voice. She had no idea that the man who made her dinner was the same man who strangled teenage girls in the woods and returned to their bodies after death. No one suspected him. Not his co-workers. Not his neighbors. Not even the detectives chasing the killer he'd become. They were searching through mugshots, poring over crime scenes, chasing leads that vanished into dead ends. And all the while the Green River Killer was walking among them, smiling, blending in, living. And the worst part? He knew they were looking. Now this brought this question. If a man like Gary could hide behind a marriage and a job, could anyone you know be hiding something too? Let me know in the comments. By the late 1990s, technology had caught up with a killer who had eluded justice for nearly 2 decades, and deep inside a forensic lab, old evidence, long dormant, was now breathing with possibility. In 2001, scientists reanalyzed trace biological materials collected from the bodies of Opal Mills, Marcia Chapman, Cynthia Hines, and Carol Christensen, and this time, DNA spoke with brutal clarity. The genetic fingerprint led to a name investigators had seen before, but never pinned down: Gary Leon Ridgway, the quiet, unassuming truck painter from the Kenworth plant in Renton. When police arrested him outside his workplace on November 30, 2001, Ridgway didn't panic, didn't resist, and didn't run. Instead, he gave them the same cold courtesy that had fooled everyone else in his life, from neighbors and co-workers to his unsuspecting wife. Inside the interrogation room, he initially denied involvement, but his mask slipped almost effortlessly when confronted with the DNA evidence, and he delivered a sentence that sent chills through the entire task force. "I killed so many women, I have a hard time keeping them straight." That confession was just the beginning of a storm no one was prepared for, because in the days that followed, Gary Ridgway admitted to killing 71 women, casually recalling faces, locations, and acts of violence as though he were recounting errands or chores, sometimes struggling to remember names, other times describing exactly how and where he disposed of their bodies. Prosecutor Jeff Baird, tasked with assembling the legal strategy, understood that without a plea deal, many families would never learn what happened to their daughters, and Ridgway agreed to exchange a full confession for life in prison rather than a death sentence. With the help of FBI profiler Dr. Mary Ellen O'Toole, investigators tried to understand what made Ridgway tick, and what they found was as terrifying as it was mundane. He was methodical, detached, and eerily normal, a man who spoke about murder like it was a job he simply performed with efficiency. In chilling interviews, he calmly described how he returned to the bodies days later to commit acts of necrophilia, how he removed jewelry to avoid detection, and how he left his victims in clusters so he could remember their locations more easily. He guided detectives to forgotten places in the woods, sometimes down long, winding trails overgrown with moss and silence, leading them to the very spots where he had discarded bones like garbage, his memory frighteningly accurate despite the passage of decades. Meanwhile, his wife, Judith Ridgway, who had once believed she had found a gentle and loving partner, watched the news unfold in disbelief, later saying in her own words, "I lived with a monster," as she tried to reconcile the man who read the Bible aloud at night with the predator who killed young women during the day. By the time his confessions ended, law enforcement had confirmed 49 victims, making him the most prolific serial killer in U.S. history by conviction. But Ridgway made it disturbingly clear that there were more, many more, whose remains might never be found and whose names may never be known. And so, while justice had finally arrived, it came not with the roar of vengeance, but with the quiet, bitter reality that this man had walked among everyone for years, unnoticed and undisturbed. After delivering one of the most extensive confessions in American criminal history, Gary Ridgway was formally sentenced in December 2003 to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a sentence that guaranteed he would never again walk free, but one that many still believed was far too merciful for the scope of his crimes. He was transferred to Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla, a maximum security facility where to this day, he remains housed as one of the oldest living serial killers in modern U.S. history. Now in his 70s, Ridgway lives in quiet infamy behind thick concrete walls, his name etched into the darkest chapters of American crime, yet his demeanor remains disturbingly unchanged. To guards and prison staff he is known not for outbursts or violence, but for his eerie calm, an aging man with a blank stare who rarely speaks unless spoken to and who has never expressed genuine remorse for the devastation he caused. Psychological evaluations over the years have painted a chilling portrait of Ridgway's mind. Diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, he lacks empathy, guilt, or emotional connection to others, and his crimes were driven by a deadly blend of control, sexual sadism, and necrophilic urges. Unlike many killers who unravel or break down after capture, Ridgway remains emotionally flat, as though the horror of his actions was never something he felt, but simply something he carried out. The most disturbing insight into his thinking came not from doctors or detectives, but from Ridgway himself during one of his court interviews where he calmly stated, "Killing them was just like cleaning out my garage. It was just something I did." That single sentence revealed everything. To him, these women were not human beings, not daughters or sisters or mothers. They were objects, disposable and forgettable. Despite being locked away, Ridgway's name continues to loom over the criminal justice system like a warning, a reminder of how evil can wear an ordinary face, how a man who murdered with such staggering consistency could sit unnoticed in a break room, drive home to a quiet cul-de-sac, and hold hands with a wife who never suspected a thing. If this chilling descent into the mind of Gary Ridgway gripped you as much as it did us, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another true crime deep dive. And while you're here, drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe we'll ever uncover the true number of Ridgway's victims, or are some secrets buried too deep to ever surface? And if you thought this case was haunting, wait until next week, when we unravel the disturbing trail left by Israel Keys, the methodical killer who buried kill kits across the United States long before selecting his victims.